All right, welcome to the Insurance Dream. I'm your host, Dave Bowling, here with Susan Anderson. She is an author, she is a consultant, and today we're going to talk about how to attract and retain Gen Z and millennial employees, because like it or not, that's who the majority, I think, of the workforce right now is. And I think maybe close to the majority. Susan will let us know more about that. But, it's also the up and coming workforce, right? We were just talking before we hit record. The youngest generation Z individual out there right now, you said, is 13 years old. So that means for the next, 10 plus years, this is the workforce that we are tasked with attracting and retaining. So, Susan, thank you so much for being here. Give me a little background on you, and then let's jump in and get to the meat and potatoes of what insurance agency owners, business executives in general, what we have to do to really have success with this demographic.
Thanks. Well, I've had about 30 years experience as an executive coach, and about 3 years ago, I wrote a book. I wrote it because it wasn't available. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book, The Path to Servant Leadership, a 12-month guide to implementation. There are about, according to Goodreads, about 36,000 books on leadership. There are only about 450 books on servant leadership, and they're all the what and the why. What is servant leadership, and why is it a good business model to implement in your company? But there was no book on how do I implement it in an existing organization without killing the company.
Yeah.
So
important, right?
Yeah, it is. It is. And it's the chicken or the egg. I'm not sure whether the writing of the book led to the coaching program, or the coaching program required the writing of the book, but they both were born about the same time.
Sure. So walk me through, and I know, probably somebody should go get your book and enroll in your program. That would probably be the best way to do it. But let's say that somebody that's not familiar at all with, with any kind of servant leadership, or how do I do it in my organization? Maybe they know what it is. Like we were talking right before, back when I was in college, I took a class on this, and I still don't feel like I really have. I mean, I have the nuts and bolts and basics, I think, in my head of servant leadership, but walk me through kind of the pathway, and then let's segue that into what exactly are the millennials and Gen Z looking for? Because for me, I am personally financially motivated, right? And it took me 5 or 6 years of hiring people to figure out that not everybody is going to be financially motivated, and in fact, I would venture to say, and you could probably tell me more about this than I know, I would venture to say most of the people that I have hired are not like that. That's not what drives them. So generally speaking, let's have a conversation about that too. So let's talk about how we become servant leaders, and then let's talk about what is attracting the Gen Z and the millennials, and then what is their motivation, generally speaking.
Right. Do we have about 3 weeks?
We have about 17 minutes. So we're going to be hitting 30,000 foot views here, right?
Well, this will be the Reader's Digest condensed view.
Beautiful.
Okay. What is servant leadership? Let's talk about the opposite, for example.
Sure.
Autocratic top-down leadership has been the primary business model in American industry.
Okay.
And in defense of the poor guy who started the company, he's sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow pad, figuring out how he can go into business for himself. And I apologize to the women out there. I'm using he as the pronoun because they're the majority and it's easier to say.
Yep.
So he's figured it out. He starts his business. It's starting to grow and he feels confident, but he recognizes that he needs help. So he starts to bring aboard senior leadership, yes, who brings aboard middle management, who brings aboard the frontline workers who have the most contact and interaction with the customer.
Yeah.
So we have evolved into a top-down autocratic leadership. Well, the guys down on the front line for the most part, feel like leadership doesn't even know their name and they feel undervalued. Well, if you don't feel valued, you don't value what you do.
Yeah.
My generation, Gen X, would have just swallowed it and kept on going. Millennials and Gen Z says, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
What we call job hopping as a derogatory term, that's Millennial and Gen Z's finding the right fit. And so they have no compunction about starting at a company and working for 45 days, quitting and moving to another company. And what they're looking for, and I didn't talk about what servant leadership is. Let's go back to the pyramid.
Sure.
Flip the pyramid upside down. And the CEO is now down at the bottom. And instead of pushing around and bossing his followers, he's now inspiring them and empowering them. And so the energy flows up. And at the top of this flow is the customers. And if the frontline workers are feeling valued and they value what they do, the relationship with the customer changes. I use an example of Jody at my grocery store. She's just all around happy person, loves her customers. I was in the store not too long ago looking for a component to a recipe I had never made before. And I asked her where the ingredient was that I was looking for. And she says, come on, I'll show you. And instead of telling me it was on aisle 8, she walked me down there and showed me exactly where it was. And along the way, she was just bubbly and happy. And I said, Jody, you seem to like your job here. She says, I love my job. Well, I never heard a grocery store employee describe their job that way. And I said, so what is it about this store that you love? She says, managers will walk by and they'll say, hey, Jody, how can we help? Or Jody, do you have everything you need to do your job well? She says, and it's not just my manager, it's all managers. And she was very animated as she was telling me this. She says, I also work for the other grocery store 2 blocks down. And I said, yeah. She said, I keep my head down. I come in, I clock out, and I collect a paycheck. And I said, what's the difference? And she says, it's the management. They try to catch us doing something wrong. So now what you see is Jody's customers in one store walk out of that store happy and satisfied. Customers that encounter Jody in the other store feel ignored. The difference is servant leadership. It isn't complicated. It's all about how you interact with your people.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, obviously, there are certain circumstances where, we're going to hire a bad apple, right? That's just kind of part of the game. You hire somebody that maybe carries in an attitude from a prior organization, or maybe just an attitude that they carry in life in general that's toxic to your work culture. Do you think that when you do that, because that can spread, right? It's a terrible thing. So when you make that mistake in hiring, if you have this servant leadership in place, do you think that that it helps isolate those kind of issues rather than allowing them to kind of fester and spread throughout the organization and potentially take it down, right? Because that's what kills a company is that attitude.
Yeah, it does, and it affects everybody around that toxic person.
Yeah.
And you don't want your good people to leave because of a bad apple.
For sure.
I would wonder why that person was toxic. And so I would want to have a sit down with them first and find out if they're not feeling valued or their needs are not being met, or we put a square peg in a round hole.
Yeah.
In which case, and that happens, we hire somebody to a vacancy, and maybe the company that person came from is the same kind of company that we're running, And so we think it's going to be a good fit because they came from the industry. And it may not, because there are different departments and different levels of engagement with other people in the organization. And sometimes it's just a question of moving them from one department to another. But if you determine that it's truly a bad apple, the best thing that you can do is free up their future.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So let's go into the motivation of, and you kind of touched on it, I think, a little bit there. The motivation of your, millennial Gen Z era employees. What pushes these people to do an excellent job? Because I think, at my perception, right, from having hired some of these people, I think that they're, and these are generalizations, certainly does not apply to everybody, right? But let's get all the bad stereotypes out there. They're lazy, they're not detail oriented, they don't care, they'd rather be on their phone. You know what I mean? And it's like, there's, like when you have a customer on the phone, maybe some of the older generations, it's like if you have an issue that you can foresee down the road, maybe your older generation folks are like, let's take care of this issue, or let's make a note that tomorrow we call and take care of this issue. Where some of your younger generations are like, oh, you're going to want to take care of this issue, so if you call back tomorrow, and it's like, okay, but we're making the customer work. Like, that's not what we want to do, right? Like, these guys pay the bills. And so that shift in the mindset, I mean, is it just because they're young, or is it because there's a whole new generation, or like what causes that? And then what do we do to change that and bring these people in, motivate them to want to come work for us, want to stick around, and want to do a good job?
Well, it's hard to generalize, but we'll do it in
we'll try.
We'll try. We'll try.
It's hard, yeah.
The millennials are very collaborative.
Okay.
They like working on a team. They like dreaming up new ideas, dreaming up new ways of doing the old thing to generate a better result. The first thing that we can do to wound them is to not let them put forth these ideas and feel like they have a safe place to dream and think and engage with management. That's the first way that's the first nail that you drive in. Gen Z.
So real quick, what I hear you saying, and I just wanted to do some reflection here, because I think this is huge. The old way of doing things, where your CEO may have spent a ton of time thinking about company development and things like that. The new successful way of doing things is taking a good portion of that time and really listening to and interacting with all levels of staff to get the company development ideas, maybe partially from there, and then communicating with those employees. So what I hear you saying is that in the past, we're not accustomed to investing that much time in talking and interacting with employees about ideas, because it's like, you know what, I'm busy, like I don't have time for all this stuff. Like, you're coming with me with these ideas that are great, and I'm glad that you think of them, but you have no idea how this business works, and you have no, you know what I mean? Like, that would have worked with like you said, with your generation, but that's not a successful model anymore. We have to change the amount of time we're willing to spend talking about these things. Is that fair?
And I label that kind of management as because I said so way of doing things.
Yeah.
And because I said so doesn't fly.
Right.
Leadership today, servant leadership especially, is about empowering others, inspiring others, and adding value to others. Mm-hmm. And that's not difficult. That's not a foreign concept. It makes sense. It's the way we want to be treated ourselves.
Yeah.
So with the millennials, they're very collaborative.
Yes.
They're very out of the box. If they fail, they want to fail forward. And we need to give them an environment, a safe environment, in order to daydream and come up with ideas. Gen Z, and you talked about the phone, they're the first generation to not know what it's like not to have a phone. I was in a restaurant one day and there was a toddler, it might have even been younger than a toddler, and he was playing on his mom's phone.
Right.
And he knew what he was doing. He was matching colors and he was matching numbers. And this baby was not 2 years old.
Wow.
So when we criticize the millennials for always being on their phone, you have to understand they've never not been on their phone.
Right.
So let's use it as a tool to help them in their job. They're a little bit more self-sufficient, and working on their own is more comfortable for them than it is the millennials. But the two in an organization, the millennials and the Gen Zs, if you lead them right, they'll follow you strong. And right now they're 46% of the workplace. And we talked about this before the show started. Gen Z, the youngest, is only 13. So we've got 10 years of expanding that 46% of the workforce to be the majority of the workforce.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, what contributed to their bouncing around to find the right fit? And as a group, millennials and Gen Z, recognition, value, appreciation, trust is so important to them. Transparency, ethics is very, very important to them. COVID did them a favor because they had a year to 2 years of working remotely, or at the very least hybrid. And they're the kind of workers today who that feeds their ego, who that feeds their need for a work-life balance. And I know that term is overused, but it's the best way to describe what they're looking for. I mentioned this to another host not too long ago, but you see large companies like Google, especially in the tech industry, Google, Amazon. You see some of these large companies, they have daycare centers in their offices. Well, Gen Z and millennials are going to need daycare for their parents and grandparents. So you're going to see 2 daycare facilities in these large corporate office buildings, which will house the youngest generation and the oldest generation.
Wow. That's fascinating. Yeah. So work-life balance, and that's kind of what I've seen that motivates, people more than money, since I've tried to pay attention, is the ability to, paid time off is the new high salary, right? Like, where maybe 20, 30 years ago, everybody wanted, the goal of a lot of people was to earn 6 figures, or, be able to, buy the big house. But this up and coming generation doesn't seem to be as concerned about that. They seem to be more concerned about time off, time with friends, time with family, travel, these different type of things. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it really is. Everybody needs to worry about money to the extent that you're meeting your monthly expenses.
Correct.
Once your survival needs are being met, that's not your highest motivator.
Right.
It is living the lifestyle, stepping away from pressure that is so important to this group.
Interesting. Yeah. And I talked about this on one of the former podcasts that we had. And we talked about, like, one of the cheapest benefits really that you can give to your employees, because you got healthcare, it's expensive. You've got, high salaries, those are expensive. You've got, all these different things that you could do for your employees that are incredibly expensive, but the paid time off, even as a small organization, if you step in and you fulfill that person's job while they're out for a week, or, whatever, or have, use it as an opportunity to cross train your other staff. So that way you can, have more than one person that knows how to do the job, which is imperative to an organization. Using those as opportunities, like, hey, step away. And then two, I used to do business to business insurance sales. I can't tell you how many people were like, I had this great employee, he or she never took time off. They were always on top of it. And then I found out that they stole $300,000 from my company. One person I talked to, owner of a very large plumbing company, this lady was so good, and he valued her so much, his accountant. He sent her on a cruise and she didn't want to go. Well, they figured out that when, they didn't want to go, that she was like basically, forging the books, where she would document in the books that she paid the whole balance of this statement from this plumbing supply place, or wherever, like all these different vendors. But she would pay the minimum payment and then put the rest of the money in her account. And she had stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, there are a lot of benefits to an organization in many different categories to have people have paid time off and have different eyes on a job, including your own. My wife is my business partner, and she jumps in every job that is within our organization every few years. And because she wants to know exactly how many minutes this task takes to complete. And the only way you can do that is if the person who is paid to complete the task is not the one doing it, and it's her. So she uses the employee's paid time off to jump in, do the task, see how long it takes. So then she's got a better idea of how many people do I need doing this job? Is this too much? Is it not enough? When they say they're overloaded, are they really overloaded, or are they not? So there's, I think, a lot of benefits all around if we structure it correctly with, the Gen Zs and the millennials and the time off and things like that, to benefit the company all around. If you had to give today's CEOs, employers, insurance agency owners, one piece of advice when it comes to servant leadership, talent attraction, employee management, just all those categories. I know this is probably, a very difficult question to answer intentionally. If you had to give them one piece of advice that could help their business move forward and become a better organization that serves customers more effectively and efficiently, what would that be?
Get clear with your core values. Okay. And that seems so obvious, but I talk to CEOs all day long, and half of them don't have written mission statements, don't have core values, don't have a vision statement. And without that, you don't have a plan. You're just kind of every day, everybody shows up and hopes they do it right. Mm-hmm. But if you have your core values solidly straight, absolutely for sure, certain that this core value is so important to you, you won't waver a bit on it. When you have that kind of identification with your core values, you hire to your core values. You choose your vendors to your core values, and you talk about core values in every meeting. Everybody's clear what the core values are. And that's the first way to find a toxic employee before they become toxic, because their core values don't line up.
I love it. Write it down. So, Susan, how do people get in touch with you?
Probably the easiest way is through my website, and that's Susan Rennie, RENNI, Anderson.com.
We'll put a link in the comments of this podcast and the comments of the video. Susan, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you bringing your expertise on, sharing it with everybody. And I hope to have you back at some point. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.